Hello everyone, today is Thursday, September 12th, 2019, and I just wanted to make a quick video talking about the minimum wage. Politicians, Bernie Sanders, all these politicians, they like to sell it as this magical law, and if only they can pass it, then money will just magically show up into the pockets of poor people. If only it worked that way. What the law literally does is it makes it illegal for certain people to work at certain price levels. Let's say your productivity is $8 an hour and the minimum wage goes to $10 an hour. Well, what happens? Now it's illegal for you to get hired unless the company wants to take a $2 an hour loss, which they won't do. What does that mean for you? It means you're literally unemployable. So who does this end up hurting the most? It ends up hurting the people at the bottom of the ladder, those with the least amount of skills, those who don't speak English, people who on their resume have nothing else written because this is their first job, this is their entry-level position, and they just need to get something written on that resume. That's who this stupid law fucks over the most. What happens in the marketplace naturally is that high-skilled workers have to compete with low-skilled workers. So obviously the high-skilled workers are going to cost more, but they're going to be able to do more. They've had more jobs, so they're a lot quicker. They can wash the dishes quicker. They can make those lattes quicker, So the low-skilled worker, how is he able to compete? Because he is cheaper to hire. So it incentivizes employers to hire both low-skilled and high-skilled workers. And once the low-skilled workers are hired, they now have more line items in their resume. That's how they start climbing up the ladder. But if you price them out of the market, you're completely eliminating that bottom rung to begin with. So let's just get right into it here. Washington Post did an article about this back in January of 2018. Pretty much they went over a couple of studies that came out in that same month, and what did they find out? Well, in California, they estimate that the increments in the minimum wage went from $6.75 to $7.50 in 2007 to $8 in '08, and were estimated to increase earnings in limited service restaurants slightly by 10% and reduced employment by 12%. So that's a net decrease. Let's go on. What happens in Chicago, LA, a bunch of other cities who implemented city-level minimum wages? What happened there? They find significantly positive effects on wages and small effects on unemployment, consistent with many previous studies. So there's no statistics, there's nothing material in here. So obviously the wages went up. There's no question about that. The legislation is mandating that the wages go up. You can't fight that. And small effects on unemployment. So they're not really specifying were hours cut, were people fired, did the unemployment rate go up? They're not really specifying what happened. So consistent with the previous studies, all right, well, this is a pretty bad study right here. Let's go on to Seattle. What'd they find out in Seattle? With a net effect of reducing low-wage employees' earnings by $125 a month. So like I was saying, it specifically affects these low-wage employees the most. All right, so let's go on to the New York Times here because they did a pretty good article about this. So, they reference the previous study we just read about. Average pay fell by an eye-popping $125 a month. Absolutely eye-popping. But then they looked at this other study specifically in Seattle, and they divided it into three groups of workers: those who work 700 hours plus per quarter, those who work 700 hours or less per quarter, or those who were previously unemployed. And what did they find out? They found out that the workers who work the most ahead of the minimum wage increases, let's call these people the high-skilled workers, these people saw a significant increase in their wages and only a small decrease in their hours. So net was actually an increase for these people. So let's think about that. The high-skilled people, those people who already have established resumes, have probably been working at these jobs for multiple years already. These people actually benefited, and it makes sense. The law says that the wage floor has to go up. So by default, even though they got their hours cut, they actually ended up getting out net positive. So good for them. But let's look at this second tier right here. The workers who work less than 700 hours per quarter. What happened to them? Almost no improvement in overall pay. $4 a month on average was their increase, which is by this study not statistically significant. So they stayed the same. Middle group stayed the same. And what happened to this final group of workers right here? Well, they look at some obscure, they don't talk about how much money they made or lost. They look at the growth rate of their employment, and the growth rate slowed down, which is, they probably didn't want to admit how absolutely slaughtered these people got. So they just kind of put these obscure measures right here. But they admit this suggests that the minimum wage had priced some workers out of the labor market, according to the authors of the study. The folks trying to get a job with no prior experience might have been worth hiring and training them. The going rate was $10 an hour, this dumbass speculated, but perhaps not at 13 an hour. Yeah, what was I telling you? You know, but let's take a look under the hood here, because I actually found the study that New York Times here is referring to, and I actually found the data, the raw data that the study was looking at. So let's do our own little study, because we have brains, we can put two to two together. You know, the truth lies in the data. So what is this? This is data derived from administrative employment records obtained from Washington Employment Security District. So a bunch of data over this. So let me break it down for you. I know this is not pretty to look at. So what you're looking at here is a bunch of different metrics, which I'll go over, and how they changed every quarter since the minimum wage increased. So the total quantity of jobs during this period, and this is all jobs in Seattle, went from 292,000 to 336,000. So right off the bat, you can tell the economy grew. You know, roughly 44,000 people got hired in this time period, which is pretty good. But what happened to some of these poorer demographics? For example, those making under 19 or 13 an hour. Well, for those making under 19, we had 92,000 employed, went down to 86. But for those, the poorest demographic, that who would get hurt the most by the minimum wage increases, they went from nearly 40,000 employed to 23,000 employed. That's almost a 50% decrease in just the quantity of jobs. Total hours, you see a same situation. The economy grew, so the total hours went up. But if you look at these poorer groups, this under 19, they got small hours cut, which is kind of what the New York Times was saying. This middle group didn't get affected that much. But then you look at the poorest demographic. They went from 14, so this is in thousands times 1,000. They went from 14 million net hours to 8 million net hours. That's 6 million hours lost. That's almost a 30%, that's like a 40% decrease in this 9-quarter period. But let's look at the cash flow. Let's see where the money went. That's what matters in the big picture. So what you're looking at here is net payroll expenditures in millions for these single site establishments. So like I said, in this 9-quarter period, the economy grew. So it makes sense that the net payroll expenditures went from 4.8 billion to 6.7 billion. Economy grew, companies spent more money on employees. It makes sense. What happened to this middle demographic? They got 529 million, and 9 quarters later they got 539 million. So it pretty much stayed the same. And if you look at this, somewhat volatile, just, you know, went up sometimes, but then here it goes below 500. So pretty much stayed the same. But what happened to this poorest demographic? What happened to their total payroll expenditures? Because they are less skilled, and because now they have a price floor implemented, they are priced out of the market. And you can see that clearly in this data. They go from $157 million to $96 million. That's a 30% decrease in 9 quarters. These people got screwed. A third of them got laid off. Private corporations in Seattle, these single site establishments, were putting $157 million into the homes of these poor people. They were paying their salaries. But because of minimum wage laws, and because they got priced out of the market, and because they were no longer profitable to hire, they got a 30% less cash went into the homes of these poor people because of solely the minimum wage law. This is during a time when the economy grew. If it weren't for the minimum wage law, these poor people would be better off. They would be getting hired in a greater capacity. So Bernie, if you're listening to this, this is the point that I really want to make. The laws that you create, these minimum wage laws that are meant to protect the poor people, that are meant to put more money into their pockets so they can feed their kids and send them to school, you're fucking over those people the hardest, Bernie. They're feeling the burn. They're feeling the burn.